Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Ronells, and tonight we're doing a ghost story. We are talking about the haunted Colonial Inn in Concord, Massachusetts. Before we dive right into that, I want to talk a little bit about last week's episode, on which I had a very special guest named Susan Barrett, who is a true blue spookaroo. I did not know Susan before we recorded that episode, aside from chatting a little bit on the Facebook group, which is where we met. Facebook.com/spookyas. And I had talked to Susan a few times, mostly about the Golden State Killer being caught. And then, not too long ago, just a few weeks ago actually, she recommended that in addition to the regular public Facebook group, we create a closed Facebook group. The reason for this is so that people who are fans of the show can go on and talk about monsters and ghosts and true crime and all that kind of stuff that we like to talk about without the public at large being able to see whatever they post. Because some of you have, real deal professional jobs. You might be a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, where maybe it's not so great if a client looks you up and can see everything you ever had to say about the Roswell incident or Bigfoot or something like that. Same thing if you're trying to find a new job. Maybe you don't want your employer Google searching you and seeing that your name comes up in a discussion about these kinds of, weirdo things that we like to talk about. And so, yes, I thought the closed group would be a good idea. And then in the closed group, I said, hey, I am looking for some guests to help me work out some technology. And see how it all works, like Skype, which is how we did last week's episode. And I think it came out pretty well. I listened to it. There were some technical issues, which I did not notice at the time when I was rendering it. They were completely my fault. I can't blame Susan, and I can't even blame Skype. They were 100% my fault. I didn't edit it correctly, and that's why you get some echo on my voice a couple times. But I'm willing to forgive myself if you are. It's not so terrible, and it didn't last terribly long. So I think we're in the clear, and I think it sounded pretty good. I'm going to try again. That was with Skype. I'm going to try again using Google Voice and see how that sounds. We'll try that maybe not this episode, obviously, but the next episode. Tonight, there is no guest. It's just you and me talking ghosts. I want to remind everyone to check out the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, including the early episodes, which are no longer available on iTunes. You don't want to miss out on Shadow People. You don't want to miss out on Johnstone's Inn, or whatever else we might be talking about in those early episodes if you're new to the show. So please go back and check out those episodes. You can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook, like I said, facebook.com/spookyas. And from there, you can request to join the Spookaroos group, if that's what you're into, if you want to have deep, dark, private conversations about all things spooky. That's where you'll find all the cool kids. Okay, now, let's talk about the Colonial Inn in Concord, Massachusetts. I am Massachusetts born and raised, and I was from a very small town called Ashland. And Ashland it's only about maybe 20 minutes, half hour away from Concord, Massachusetts. And I used to go there when I was in high school because we used to go to Walden Pond. And it's a beautiful, beautiful spot. Of course, Henry David Thoreau wrote a whole book about his time there. And I highly, highly recommend that book, by the way. And it's just a beautiful spot to visit. But the way that I first became aware of the Colonial Inn was through a book that I bought sometime maybe in middle school, maybe in high school, but it's called Haunted Places, the National Registry. Nope, National Directory. Haunted Places, the National Directory. And I'll tell you something extra spooky about this book. I bought it at Borders. Borders is a dead chain now. So maybe this book is extra spooky and haunted. Anyway, I bought this book and it goes state by state and lists town by town all the haunted places. Of course, My hometown haunt, Johnstone's Inn, is listed under Ashland in Massachusetts, but also the Colonial Inn in Concord. And it doesn't say too much about it. It just says that there's kind of a grayish figure that is seen sometimes, and it's believed to be a guest that died sometime in the 1800s, and they were first seen in the 60s. And so anyway, here's another little known fact about myself. When I was in high school, I was one of those cool kids who very briefly had a public access television show. Yeah, that's right. It was called The Other Side. And despite the name and what I'm about to say about it, it was not predominantly paranormal featuring. That did not come out of my mouth right, but you know what I meant. And it was called The Other Side because it was supposed to be like teen views on stuff, like the other side of the story and, whatever. But it actually was just two goofballs goofing around. We did do a Halloween episode, and as part of that Halloween episode, we had hoped to take a look around the Colonial Inn. In fact, I called the Colonial Inn, and in the book that I have, still have it to this day, I even wrote down the contact person's name. And it's, still in the book and everything. So we called and said, hey, we'd like to come in. I forget, it was a Monday holiday. I forget if it was Patriots Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, one of those Monday holidays. But we said, hey, we'd like to come in and, videotape a little bit, and then we'll be out of your hair. And they said, yeah, no problem. When you come here, ask for this person, and we'll show you around, and, okay. So we get there on the day, and the place is hopping because it is still an active inn, but it's also a bar and restaurant. So the place was packed, and there were people eating inside and out. And so we go in and we say, hey, we were supposed to talk to so-and-so, and the person at the desk is like, well, they're not even here today. And I was like, well, we scheduled this. We made an appointment to be here. And they were like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, and it's one of our busiest days, so there's no way anyone's going to be able to help you today. And so we left, dejected and saddened. And I had not set foot in the Colonial Inn since that time, and that was longer ago than I care to admit. But just this past weekend, I returned. Now, this time I didn't call ahead. I didn't try to get any kind of special, tour or anything like that. In fact, I wasn't even going to go inside. I was just going to go and take pictures. So I called a certain young lady who I happen to be partial to, and I said, hey, certain young lady, you want to come with me to Concord? And, we'll take I'll show you around a little bit, and then we'll go to the Colonial Inn, and I'll take a couple pictures on the outside. And she was agreeable. So we went, and again, it was another packed, busy day at the Colonial Inn. And as we walked up, I was like, this isn't very spooky, because it's just a bunch of people on a beautiful day sitting outside eating lunch. And I'm trying to take a picture where it looks kind of, ominous and spooky, and I could not get that vibe to save my life. But then we were hungry, so I said, hey, you know what? They got a restaurant here. Why don't we have our lunch here? And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit, but I know you people didn't come here to listen to me talk about my lunch. So let's get to the haunting of the inn. First of all, it is important to go over just a little bit of the history of the inn, just to give it some context. The inn was originally 3 separate buildings. The earliest of the building dates all the way back to 1716. During the build-up to the American Revolution, the front part of the inn, which is now the front desk and the gift shop, very small gift shop, that served as a storehouse for provisions like, arms and other things that the Minutemen and local patriots might take into battle with the British soldiers, because everybody knew trouble was a-brewing, right? You all remember the famous story of Paul Revere, the midnight ride of Paul Revere. He was riding from Boston, and he was supposed to go to Concord. And all along the way, he was warning people the British are coming. and, be ready, get your arms, wake everybody up, get the Minutemen ready. That was the idea, right? And Concord was where all these, guns and ammunition were stored. That was where the big supply was being held, and the British were coming to take it. So he was supposed to make it to Concord, but of course we know he got captured just outside of town. He got captured in Lexington, which is just the next town over. So he didn't quite make it all the way, but the message still got through. And the first skirmish with the British soldiers happened just a half a mile away from the Colonial Inn on North Bridge. Of course, if you remember your history, the Patriots were successful in that battle, and they drove the British back to Boston. Of course, this was just the first of many battles. This was the shot heard around the world, as it was known, and of course the British would be back, and there would be more bloodshed and lives lost on both sides. Now, at the time of this battle, the hotel was owned by a man named Dr. Timothy Minot, Jr. He lived on the western side of the building, which is now home to the Liberty Restaurant, if you go to visit there. On April 19th, 1775, the day of the shot heard around the world, battle at North Bridge, Dr. Minot opened his home to care for the wounded patriots. He used the library room as a hospital, and one of his bedrooms, the room now known as Room 24, as the operating room. And downstairs, directly underneath Room 24, Room 27, now in current days, that was the morgue. So this was a Revolutionary War doctor who was patching up patriots in his home and basically using it for a wartime hospital. But he was not the only person to own the home. Other owners included the Thoreau family. Yes, Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden Pond, his family owned the Colonial Inn for a time. He was not there. He was living in Harvard. He was attending Harvard at the time. So, he might have come home on the weekends or something like that. But his family owned the home, and his aunts were famous for hosting get-togethers in the sitting room. Eventually, it was sold outside of the family and switched from being a private home to a boarding house in 1866. And it was originally named the Thoreau House. Now, this wasn't after Henry David Thoreau. This was after his aunts, who, again, were very popular in town because they hosted these get-togethers in the sitting room. The inn was sold again in 1889 and renamed the Colonial Inn, which is what it's still known as to this day. A new modern wing was added in the 1960s. So that's when all three buildings came together to form what is now known as the Colonial Inn. And it's had some famous guests in its time, including J.P. Morgan, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John Wayne, Shirley Temple, Arnold Palmer, Robert Duvall, Bryan Cranston, Jason Sudeikis, Olivia Wilde, and Don Henley. That's the history. But what about the ghost? Well, according to the inn's website, the most famous haunted and sought-after guest room is Room 24. As stated earlier, during the Revolutionary War, this portion of the hotel served as the hospital for wounded patriots. And Room 24 in particular served as the operating room. Several soldiers who were operated on in Room 24 unfortunately passed away during surgery. The deceased were carried directly downstairs into Room 27, which at the time was being used as the morgue. In June of 1966, Judith Velez and her husband, from Highland Falls, New York, booked Room 24 at Concord's Colonial Inn. The newlywed couple were on their honeymoon and looking forward to their stay in the quaint New England inn. The next morning, however, the bride looked rather pale. The desk clerk asked Judith if she was feeling well. Judith seemed to hesitate before answering, "Yes, I feel fine." About 2 weeks after the incident, the inn received a letter from Judith. It read in part, I have always prided myself on being a fairly sane individual, but on the night of June 14th, I began to have my doubts. On that night, I saw a ghost in your inn. The next morning, I felt too foolish to mention it to the management, so my husband and I continued on our honeymoon. I wondered whether or not any other sightings of ghosts had been reported, or if any history of one has been involved in the inn. The incident sounds very melodramatic. I was awakened in the middle of the night by a presence in the room, a feeling that some unknown being was in the midst. I opened my eyes, and I saw a grayish figure at the side of my bed, to the left, about 4 feet away. It was not a distinct person, but a shadowy mass, in the shape of a standing figure. It remained still for a second, and then the apparition slowly melted away. It was a terrifying experience. I was so frightened I could not scream. I was frozen to the spot. For the remainder of the night, I could not fall asleep. It was spent trying to conjure a logical explanation for the apparition. It was not a reflection of the moon, as all the curtains were completely closed. Upon relating the incident to my husband, he said the ghost was included in the price of the room. Well, to me that sounds like a shadow person incident. And if you listen to the Shadow People episode number 1, well, it's the first full episode anyway, you'll know my opinion about shadow people. But other guests were not so demure. One night, the quiet of the hotel lobby during the late night, early morning hours was shattered when a guest came running down from the second floor. When the hotel staff asked if she was okay, the woman's eyes bulged and she shrieked, "This place is haunted!" The hotel staff didn't need to ask. They knew she must be staying in room 24. They offered her a different room, but the woman was inconsolable. She said she would not be staying in any room, and would, in fact, be leaving as soon as someone went to her room, packed her bags, and brought it down to her. She refused to re-enter the room, even to claim her personal belongings. A staff member went up to pack her bag, but, strangely, he returned in less than a minute. "I didn't have to pack your bag," he said. "It was already packed and waiting on the bed." One guest, a male this time, was awoken by a sudden burst of bright light in the early morning. It was too early for the sun to be coming up, but perhaps it was just reflected light from street traffic. The man attempted to put it out of his mind and to go back to sleep. When he did, he reported an incredibly vivid dream. In the dream, the room he was staying in no longer looked like a modern hotel room. It looked as he imagined it must have looked in the 1700s. Also, he was not alone. A woman sat in a wooden chair near him. She looked over at him and said, "I was the mistress of a man who lived here in Concord, and this is the place where we met to have our rendezvous." The guest reported that the scene then suddenly changed, and he saw the young woman lying in her nightclothes in the bed. A man entered the room and placed a pillow over her face. He then struck her with some unknown deadly weapon. The dream ended with the voice of the woman saying, "My body was removed by others and taken away." Other guests have reported lights flickering in the room or turning on and off completely on their own. One guest woke up in the middle of the night and every light was on in the room as well as the television. Guests claim to hear whispers coming from the closets or have seen doors slam shut on their own. The hotel reports that several ghost hunters, both professional and amateur, have shown up and spent the night in room 24, and that they claim to have captured various things, both on film and on audio recording. Some guests even claim that the friendly spirits have tucked them into bed. Although there is no single culprit for who the spirits might be, some have said that they have seen a middle-aged woman, and that she was allegedly a nurse named Rosemary. I don't know where this information came from, but the website mentions it. Also, wounded soldiers have been known to appear in the room only to disappear moments later. The hotel reports that thrill seekers from all over come to stay in the infamous Room 24, just hoping to catch a glimpse of some supernatural activity. Of course, the hotel cannot guarantee that if you stay in Room 24, you will see a ghost, but their website also points out that the spirits do not just confine themselves to Room 24. They also like to wander the halls of the Colonial Inn just as much as the living guests do. Both an older woman and a tall, slim gentleman with a top hat have been spotted in the sitting room. A young girl wearing a bonnet has been seen playing by the front desk of the hotel. And both guests and employees have spotted spirits in colonial attire sitting in the otherwise empty Liberty Room. Things fall off shelves and items go missing without a trace for weeks, only to return in the strangest places. Both guests and employees have heard voices coming from right behind them, only to turn around and see nothing there. All of that was from the website. They actually have a pretty cool website, the Colonial Inn website. And of course, from there you can book your stay. We also have a report of a chef who worked late in the night there. He was working late, and by the time he was finished his work, he didn't have much time to go home and go to bed before he had to come back for work in the morning to prep the kitchen once again. Now, Room 24 is one of the luxurious rooms in the Colonial Inn. In fact, right now, it costs almost $400 per night to stay there, which is why you're not hearing me recording from Room 24. I can't justify spending $400 on a hotel room for something that I don't really believe in a town that is 20 minutes from where I live. Anyway, because it is such a high-priced room, it's often one of the rooms during the slower seasons that is not occupied. So, in theory, if this story is to be believed, the chef said, "Hey, which room is open? Room 24? Okay, I'm going to crash there for tonight since we have no guests there. I'll be out in the morning and then I'm going to go to work in the kitchen." And the hotel owners were fine with this. So he said that he didn't actually see a ghost and he didn't really hear anything. He just felt a presence in the room and it wouldn't let him go to sleep. So finally, after hours of trying to fall asleep and just feeling this presence in the room, he said, "Hey, look, I work here. You don't need to bother me. I'm cool with you. You be cool with me. You know I got to be at work early in the morning in the kitchen, so please leave." Then he heard the door open and close on its own, and he was able to finally get some sleep. Now, speaking of ghost hunters that have been to the show, there is available online on YouTube a clip from Sci-Fi's show Ghost Hunters. These are the Taps guys. And it is one of the funniest clips that you will ever see for all the wrong reasons if you're a ghost hunter, but for all the right reasons if you are a skeptic. Now, it shows two men. I'm not super familiar with the show, so I don't know names or anything like that. I think it's TAPS is the organization that they run, whatever that stands for. But I've said before that I hate these kind of shows. So please, if you're a fan of this kind of thing, you can just write it off to, "Oh, well, Eric doesn't like this kind of thing." But this is hysterically awful, in my opinion. Two men in the fucking night vision light, which I always hate. Clue number one, I'm going to hate this show. But they're standing there and they're talking to a ghost, right? There's one guy in the foreground and one guy in the background. The guy in the background is pacing or kind of wobbling back and forth on his feet. And he's standing near the door. So he's doing this while the guy's talking, and the other guy's like, "Show us a sign. If you want us to leave, show us a sign. Close one of the doors, show us a sign. Close one of the doors, show us a sign." And as he's saying this, like I said, the other guy is kind of wobbling back and forth on his feet. And the door to the room closes on the guy that's kind of, waddling back and forth. And the guy jumps so fast, he does like two little jumps. And it's the biggest overreaction I've seen in a long time. It's cartoonish. Again, I say this all the time, but if you're a ghost hunter and you go somewhere expecting to find ghosts, why are you so fucking shocked when you find proof of paranormal activity? What you would call proof. I wouldn't call it proof, but in theory, you believe that this is proof of paranormal activity. Now, you can say the guy was startled by the closing door, but again, they fucking asked the spirit to close the door. Of course, the real truth is they probably, in my humble opinion, don't actually believe that the ghost closed the door. He knows full well that he caused it to close by, wading back and forth there in front of the door. And his big reaction was just what was good for television. Because I told you I went to this place with a young lady. I had shown her this clip, either before or after we left, I forget. And I said, "Oh, can you believe this?" And she basically said what I just said. She's like, "Well, that's Hollywood. You got to. It wouldn't be much of a show if they just went and said like, oh yeah, we didn't find anything." And the thing is, she's totally right. She's 100% right. And that's why I'm a fucking asshole. Because if I just, with the knowledge that I have, if I just went out there and said like, "Oh my God, there's spirits here," and oh, look at this, the great spirit of Zool is here, and I feel the presence, and this is terrifying, and blah, blah, blah. And then, with my knowledge of cold reading and all that stuff, I could be the world's foremost spiritualist, psychic, ghost talker, whatever. And I just can't bring myself to do it. And I'm the asshole for it because here I am living in a shitty apartment and these people are making millions of dollars. What am I doing with my life? Anyway, now I'm really bummed out. I don't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, so ghost hunters. Okay, so then they say, "Okay, you closed that door, but we weren't really sure that you meant to do that. So please close the closet door. Open the closet door and close the closet door." And nothing happens. Then you see this guy, the other guy going back and forth to the door. And surprise, surprise, the same door closes again. Now, to demonstrate that he is not the one, moving the door, he goes over and he opens it and then he jumps up and down in front of it. But you can see he's kind of jumping in certain spots. I don't really buy it as the explanation. I think the door needed to be worked a little bit. That's why you saw him waddle both times, kind of to and fro in front of the door. So I think that is a very obvious explanation as to how that happened. Also, this is a very old building. Having grown up and lived in and around very old buildings, these kind of things happen all the time. These doors closing and that kind of thing. That's what you call character in a house. And these are the little quirks that they develop over the years. So, in the way that they wanted me to be impressed, I was highly unimpressed with the footage from Ghost Hunters. Although I was very impressed with the comedic value of it. So I recommend you check it out. Of course, I will post that as long as the clip is still available on YouTube. I will post it on the website and on the Facebook group. And just for the record, the lunch that I had there was delicious. I happened to have a lamb burger with a special kind of semi-hard English cheese. I forget what it was called. I should have taken a picture of the menu so I'd remember. And also something I hadn't had before. They had it was topped with pickled tomatoes, which was a very interesting and very sweet flavor. I actually quite enjoyed it. And so I would say, I got a burger, which is perhaps not the best way to judge a particular menu, but even the burger was very good. Now, this was a special, so I don't know if it will be available should you come to visit. But the young lady that I was with, she got a salad, and she also enjoyed it very much. So 2 thumbs up for the fine dining at Concord's Colonial Inn. And it is really... It's set in a very good area, very historic area. It is right near North Bridge, which we mentioned, and it is also near the cemetery, which contains Sleepy Hollow, not the Sleepy Hollow from the Headless Horseman and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I was told, I don't know if this is true, but I was told that any place where authors are buried is known as a Sleepy Hollow. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, they do call this portion of the cemetery Sleepy Hollow, and in this portion of the cemetery are buried Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau and his entire family, and the author of Little Women and other books, Louisa May Alcott, and her entire family as well. So we visited there as well, and I took some pictures there, which I will also post. And then, of course, the Colonial Inn itself is located in Monument Square, so there are monuments there to the Revolutionary War as well as the Civil War, and the Colonial Inn itself is very historic, not too far from Walden Pond, which, as I stated earlier, is a very beautiful and historic place. So lots of history. I highly recommend, if you're planning a visit to the Boston area, and you, especially if you want to focus on the historic aspects and the Revolutionary War, you could do much worse than the Colonial Inn. It's a very charming little spot. And you know how much I love Salem. I talk about Salem all the time, but I think actually my first love as far as Massachusetts towns go is Concord. It's, you know, kind of a fancy town. It's a little fancier than I am, but it's a very quaint looking, lovely place. So I highly recommend, if you come to Massachusetts, you check out Concord. How could you not? If you're into history at all, how could you not? There's so much. I mean, the birth of the nation happened right there. So that's about all I have to say about Concord's Colonial Inn. I know this is a shorter episode, but keep in mind that I've been doing longer episodes recently, so I don't actually owe you a longer episode. Just kidding, kinda. You know, it's always a pleasure to speak with you guys, and I want to thank you for listening, as always. It would be a huge favor to me if you could share the show with your friends. I am not a wealthy person. I cannot afford to pay for advertising, and I do not belong to any podcast network or anything like that. I am just a simple man recording a fun, silly little show outside of his apartment, and passing it on and seeing, you know, whoever joins us. And it's been great so far, and I appreciate you folks listening and sharing the show. And if you could please take a moment and give the show a review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or Stitcher or iHeartRadio, wherever else you may be listening from. It really means a lot to me when I see those good reviews coming in. Don't forget to check out the website, spookyas.com, and find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. You can search for the Spookaroos group just by searching Spookaroo on Facebook. Look for the spooky one, not the children's clothing line. And until next time, don't be afraid.